Questions orales. The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm advised that yesterday I incorrectly attributed anti-Muslim statements to the Chief of Staff of the Ministry of the Environment. I apologize and totally withdraw those remarks. Mr. Speaker, the other concerns raised yesterday have been borne out in the news. The government is planning legislation which will effectively destroy protections provided under the Human Rights Act. Let's be clear. Religious freedom is fully guaranteed in law in Canada. It's in the Charter. It's scrupulously protected by our Supreme Court judgments. It was guaranteed in law passed by Liberal governments. So since religious freedom is already fully protected, Mr. Speaker, what protections is the Prime Minister presently intending to remove? Isn't this just an attempt to remove sexual orientation as a prohibited ground of discrimination in our country, and totally against what was already adopted by this Parliament?
Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the apology from the Leader of the Opposition. When I heard the quote, I thought it was at least out of context. It turns out not to have been said at all. I would therefore caution the Leader of the Opposition in his next question in engaging in speculation. In fact, the government has not any plans at all along the lines that he's suggesting.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I totally accept what the Prime Minister said, and I ask him then to engage on the floor of the House, since this is an opportunity to deal with that, not to engage in a smokescreen, not to let his political calculations trump his responsibility to uphold human rights, and assure this House that he's not preparing legislation which has as its intent to drive in horse and cart through the protections for Canadian citizens who may be gay and lesbian and that are provided for in the Canadian Human Rights Act, the Charter, and other provisions of Canadian law.
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition knows, I've been clear for some time the government will bring forward a motion for debate and for free vote this fall. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is worried about the Charter. Let me read the following quote to him. Pierre Trudeau believed the Charter of Rights and Freedoms would bring us together, yet the results haven't worked out that way. I take that quote from the front runner for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker.
Order. I know honourable members want to hear the question, and the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the floor to ask his question. Order.
Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister wants to deal with the accusations in the newspapers this morning, which say that the Prime Minister is contemplating a bill dealing with certain individuals, dealing with companies. Can the Prime Minister say if only gays and lesbians will be the victims of this discrimination, or are there other groups that will later be targeted by this type of discrimination? Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'll repeat. Instead of speculating about what this government intends, which are baseless, I would suggest to the Leader of the Opposition that he should instead be concerned about the positions of the future leader of his own party, the Honourable Member for Westmount Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, in recent days we've seen that the government doesn't care about protecting minorities. The President of the Treasury Board cancelled the Court Challenges program. The Minister of Justice is determined to prolong the debate on same-sex marriage. And finally, the Minister of Economic Development has refused funding to the gay community of Montreal. Has the Prime Minister told his ministers to refuse support to all gays and lesbians in all government programs? The Honourable Minister of Regional Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, I think Canadians are entitled to know that 70% of Economic Development Canada's $200 million budget, 70% of that money goes to various not-for-profit organizations in Quebec. That said, When I have a file in front of me, it's analyzed based on quality and merit. In this case, the Black and Blue Festival was requesting $55 million from us. I looked at all of the material and found that our contribution was not essential to the event, and we weren't wrong because the event did take place. The Honourable Member for Westmount Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, Economic Development Canada helps festivals on the basis of the economic impact of the event. So they asked for money to help with the international promotion of the festival. And this festival has spin-offs of $25 million for Montreal, and the minister refused funding. What are we to understand from this? Are the minister's personal opinions interfering with his assessment of the economic benefits to Montreal? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, my responsibility as a minister is to look at all files and to assess the value of them. Mr. Speaker, we felt that the $55 million that was asked for marketing was not essential to the holding of the event. We thought they could do it themselves, and we weren't wrong. That said, Mr. Speaker, if you want to talk about homophobia, how is it that this same minister said yes when the Out Games were held, and we were asked to advance the money to help them? How is it that we gave $100 million to a diversity event which was connected with the Out Games? How is that possible? The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the government is taking more and more decisions based on ideology. Yesterday, we learned that the Minister of the Environment had hired as Chief of Staff Mr. Darrell Reid, a man who said offensive things about gays and lesbians, as well as denying the problem of climate change. Mr. Reid, in addition, made certain statements more than highly debatable about the honour of Quebecers. How does the Prime Minister explain the Minister of Environment appointing someone to a position as controversial, to a key position in her office? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Reid has personal views on issues like marriage. The leader of the bloc has known for a long time that this government's intention is to have a debate where members can express themselves freely on that issue. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. What about the offensive remarks, Mr. Speaker? This person was hidden during the election campaign. The Minister of Economic Development refused to grant funding to the Black and Blue Festival, which has economic spin-offs of $25 million. An advisor to the Prime Minister stated that the preference was given to family events. Can the Prime Minister explain to us, since when do the ideological values of his government play into funding decisions? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, never has that criteria been one that we went by. It's based on merit. I'd like to remind everyone that this government, Mr. Speaker, all organizations that submit projects to us, they do this on a 3-year basis. So if we're lacking $3 million, it's $1 million, $1 million, $1 million. And what we're doing now is people have the feeling that once we've said yes, it's yes forever. We have to analyze files on the merits. We have to come up with funding to contribute to the economic development of all regions of Quebec. The Honourable Member for Haute-Gaspésie, La Métis-Matane, Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Coming back to the Black and Blue Festival, the minister responsible for regional development claims that the funding was cut because the event took place anyway. That's just an excuse, and it's not the real reason. How can the minister claim that Black and Blue is taking place anyway as a justification for cutting funding, whereas the Just for Laughs got its funding and other festivals too? And it's hard to say that those festivals haven't taken off already too. The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, I have to remind my honourable colleague that we have a lot of files to analyze, about 200 a year, or 1,200 a year. We can't say yes to all of them. My priority in recent months has been to set up 6 new initiatives to contribute to economic development of the various regions of Quebec, especially those with declining population. So these files were assessed, and we found that our contribution was not fundamental to the holding of the event. It was going to happen anyway without that $55 million. It's a festival that's in its 16th year. It's a mature event. The Honourable Member for Haute-Gaspésie, La Métis-Matin. Now we see why the minister was in such a hurry to get rid of his regional directors. Isn't that the real explanation? The minister got rid of everyone so that he could freely impose his own values and those of his party. And he could freely choose the events that he liked, period. The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, the issue of accountability is extremely important to this government. Each of us, as a minister, is responsible. We have to be accountable to Parliament for our way of managing budgets, both economic development and other departments. So the minister decides, looks at the files himself or herself, and decides where the money is going to go. And in this case, the amount was not essential to the holding of the event, and we weren't wrong. The event is going to take place anyway in Montreal.
East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, evidence mounts that Afghanistan is the wrong mission for Canada. On Monday, the U.S. Senate Majority Leader conceded this conflict won't end militarily. Today, the United Nations reports an estimated 15,000 families in southern Afghanistan who've been uprooted since July. Over 1 million Afghans are refugees in their own country. Mr. Speaker, when will this government realize that the George Bush counterinsurgency is not helping Afghans and is not making Canadians safer either?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member knows, the President of Afghanistan was here and expressed his support for Canada, the help that Canadian soldiers and Canadian diplomats and Canadian public servants are giving to his country. She also knows full well that the United Nations mandated this mission. It has wide support and participation from members of the United Nations, and we will continue to work with the international community to bring prosperity and peace and further development to Afghanistan.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister cannot ignore the reality. The region is not becoming more secure, it's becoming less secure. There are more kids going to school, there are fewer kids going to school, and there are growing numbers of Canadians behind this liberal conservative blunder. There are fewer. When will this government bring Karzai, the Pakistani military leadership, and combatants to the same table to hammer out a ceasefire that will finally bring stability and security in southern Afghanistan? When will they do that?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the real question is why the NDP does not want the international community to succeed in Afghanistan. And more importantly, this week, Mr. Speaker, when we have learned, sadly, of the deaths of Canadian soldiers serving valiantly in Afghanistan, while they were in the process of rebuilding roads in that country for the benefit of the population, why, instead of expressing support for our soldiers and sympathy for the loved ones and for those they have lost, why the NDP gets up and asks despicable questions like this?
The Honourable Member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, even Conservative premiers in Atlantic Canada are opposed to this government's crippling cuts to literacy. PEI's Pat Binns and Newfoundland and Labrador's Danny Williams denounced this regressive decision. Premier Williams even distanced himself from his federal cousins. He said these callous cuts, quote, show the difference between true right-wing conservatives and progressive conservatives. Will the Treasury Board President show some common sense and reverse this senseless slashing?
Honourable Minister of Social Development.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the facts are that we are going to be investing over $80 million in literacy programs. Mr. Speaker, this government is refocusing its energies and its money on programs of national nature to help literacy at all levels. Mr. Speaker, that's our commitment. That's why we're also investing in workplace skills. We're investing in new immigrants and their literacy issues, something that party voted against.
The Honourable Member for Laval-les-Îles. Mr. Speaker, the International Survey on Adult Literacy indicates that almost 1 out of 2 Quebecers aged 16 to 65 doesn't have the appropriate reading skills to operate fully in society. In addition, the biography of Mr. Jacques Demers and groups like Alpha Laval in my riding of Laval-les-Îles have experienced an explosion in requests for literacy services. How can the President of the Treasury Board be ignorant of this fact, and when does he intend to restore funding to those programs? The Honourable Minister of Social Development.
Speaker, by refocusing our energies on adult learning and literacy skills, Canadians are going to have access to the best literacy training available. And these, Mr. Speaker, for change will be programs that run efficiently and deliver real results for real Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the mean-spirited cuts to literacy will force organizations that help Canadians improve their reading and writing skills to close their doors. This government refuses to honour the Labour Market Partnership Agreement in Ontario, which earmarked $1.4 billion for workplace training emphasizing literacy skills. The President of the Treasury Board used to believe that literacy training was key when he was an Ontario minister. So why has he abandoned Ontario adults now?
Honourable the Minister of Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, we do believe in literacy. That's why we're investing over $80 million. That's why we put new funds into the settlement funding process for new Canadians. Money that had been frozen by the previous government for over 10 years. We put that money in because we're investing in literacy, and by the way, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals voted against it.
Honourable Member for Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are shocked and saddened by the surprise massive Conservative cuts to the most vulnerable in our society. But nothing has enraged Canadians more than the senseless cut to 9 million unfortunate Canadians who have problems reading. The new Conservative government is forcing the potential closure of literacy coalitions across the North, including the Northwest Territory Literacy Council, the Nunavut Literacy Council, the Yukon Literacy Coalition, and culturally based programs at Nunavut Arctic College. Shame! Will the minister responsible for literacy stop giving that ridiculous answer about what you're funding and reinstate the funds that you've cut to all these organizations?
Yes! The Honourable Member knows he must address his remarks to the Chair, and I'd urge all Honourable Members to continue to do that properly. The Minister for Social Development. Order.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're going to invest in literacy, but we're going to do it right. We're going to do over $80 million plus over $300 million for a new settlement program. Monies that government, despite all its claims, voted against. Mr. Speaker, Canadians want their money to be spent wisely, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
The Honourable
Member for Hochelaga. When the Justice Minister holds a vote on same-sex marriage, he intends to give more ammunition to religious groups, and in case the government loses the vote on same-sex marriage, does the Minister of Justice recognize that this pretext of protecting religious freedom and freedom of expression, freedoms which are already protected by the Charter of Rights, what he really is aiming at is promoting religious groups and having them discriminate without fear of any recriminations? The Honourable Justice Minister.
Mr. Speaker, during the election, this Prime Minister and this government made a promise that there would be a free vote on that issue, that we would bring a motion forward. That's what we're going to do, Mr. Speaker. Everything else is simply speculation.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. This bill is clear. It's just a way to use religious groups which fit into the conservative ideological base. Will the minister admit that his bill aims to do nothing less than protect religious words from future litigation? In other words, this government wants to protect freedom of religion. What they want to do is legalize discrimination. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the member. Order, please. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister has the floor to answer the question. Once again, Mr. Speaker, the member is only speculating. I haven't seen any such bill. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the directions this government is taking are becoming increasingly clear. While it's preparing to sacrifice some rights in favor of religious groups, they've also appointed Carrie Lynn Finlay and Darrell Reid as the Chief of Staff, who's from an extreme right religious group focused on the family. Is the Prime Minister aware that the presence of this type of ideology makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to believe that Ms. Finlay will be objective enough to make fair and objective decisions, especially on issues of discrimination? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the individual mentioned in respect of the Human Rights Commission is a very competent and qualified individual. We're very proud of that appointment.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the Black and Blue Festival is having its funding cut off. The Justice Minister's bill, the appointment of Ms. Finlay and Chief of Staff Reid, the end of the Court Challenges program, these examples are multiplying. Do not all these decisions show that it's a turn to the right that the government's taking, and finally they're showing their true colors? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I think that our record is a good one. We've intended to, in fact, give Canadians good government, something that former government did not provide to the people of Canada. And we intend to do so on a principled basis.
Honourable Member for Newton North Delta.
Mr. Speaker, this minority government has slashed $17.7 million in funding for literacy programs, describing them as wasteful.
Shame.
People in British Columbia are deeply disturbed at the impact this will have on literacy services and adult education. Mr. Speaker, what does this minority government have against helping British Columbians who want to learn how to read and write?
The Honourable the Minister of Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, we're trying to help all Canadians get value for their money. We're also trying to help them get the literacy and training skills they need. That's why we're investing over $80 million in literacy programs. We're investing over $300 million in new settlement programs for new Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand why the Liberal government says that they're for literacy, and yet they voted against that.
The
Honourable Member for St. Boniface. Mr. Speaker, this morning the literacy group called Literacy Partners of Manitoba announced that the Conservative government cuts would force them to close their doors by the summer of 2007. The Director General, Ms. Abs, is furious about what the Treasury Board President said when he stated that the problem has to be dealt with at the grassroots and not try to repair damages after the fact. Someone has said that the program has changed his life. He's now a productive member of society. Does the President of Treasury Board truly think that this person, Mr. Hawa, wasn't worth the amount invested in him? The Honourable Minister of Social Development.
Speaker, we're going to be helping Canadians, those who really need it at the national level. We're going to be helping youth at risk with their literacy. We're going to be helping Aboriginals with their literacy, the unemployed and new Canadians develop the skills, the literacy and numeracy skills that they need to survive and thrive in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues today have demonstrated how this minority, mean-spirited Conservative government has cut the heart out of literacy services across Canada. As the chief hack and slasher, the President of the Treasury Board gave the back of his hand to millions of Canadians who need literacy help. No value for money, he said. The government should, quote, not be trying to do repair work after the fact. He has denied that quote, Mr. Speaker, so I ask him, A, does he know that insult was caught on tape? And B, does he still deny it?
Order. The Honourable, the Minister of Social Development. Order. The Honourable, the Minister of Social Development is rising to answer the question. She now has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, we are focusing on investing in Canadians who really need it. Right across the country at the federal level, we believe that we need to focus on issues of federal importance and allowing local and regional people to deal with their local and regional issues. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we're going to be investing in literacy programs, over $80 million of it, to help youth at risk, the disabled, Aboriginal Canadians, and all those other vulnerable segments of our society.
The Honourable Member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, they've just proven my point. As the Mike Harris hatchet man on social services, this Treasury Board Minister spent a lot of time designing mean-spirited schemes to keep welfare from the poor in Ontario. One of his big ideas was that welfare should be denied, and get this, unless the poor took a literacy test. He said literacy can empower people, improve lives, expand jobs, boost the whole economy. That was his view in 2001. Was that just an excuse to block poor people from welfare, or will he now buy his own argument and restore $18 million in federal funding for literacy?
The Honourable, the Minister of Social Development. Order.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank and congratulate the President of the Treasury Board for supporting over $80 million in spending on literacy, as well as supporting the President of the Treasury Board also supported the over $300 million that we're putting into settlement funding for new Canadians to help them learn literacy, English, and French in this country so that they will have the skills to get jobs here. And our President of the Treasury Board supported that. That party did not.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquedoboit Valley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the Prime Minister appointed Barbara Hagerman as the Lieutenant Governor for Prince Edward Island. Yesterday, the member from Malpak tried to put a negative political spin on it by undermining her qualifications. As Mrs. Hagerman is a very well-respected member of her community and her province, would the Prime Minister comment on this appointment?
Good question. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Order.
Mr. Speaker, I was rather surprised by the comments from the member for Malpak yesterday. Prior to appointing Barbara Hagerman, I'd received letters from a number of Canadians. I received this endorsement. Ms. Hagerman would bring her admirably conscientious qualities to vice-regal office with right of land, and that she would therefore be an admirable choice. That came from a colleague she served with on the Canada Council for the Arts, Senator Tommy Banks. I also got this quote: her life story has been one of accomplishment and achievement. I am confident she would bring to the position of Lieutenant Governor a deep sense of purpose and passion. Another Liberal, the former Premier of Prince Edward Island, Catherine Colbeck.
Order. The Honourable Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of the Environment has already had to apologize about remarks made to the effect that she's not interested in Quebec when it comes to the environment. And we know that the Liberals aren't interested in the environment. The Environment Commissioner said that the Liberal plan was a national disaster. This minister has already given a free ride to her ticket to her friends in the oil sector. Can she tell us if she has the courage and the permission of her boss to increase the standards for greenhouse gas emissions in the automobile sector? The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize the importance of the auto sector to the Canadian economy, but we also recognize that this is a sector that needs to make large contributions to our environmental agenda. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, we had a very positive meeting with the auto sector last night. They understand why clean air matters to them. My concern, Mr. Speaker, is with Buzz Hargrove and the Liberal Premier of Ontario. I'm sure they do want cleaner air, Mr. Speaker, but if the Liberals don't want it, the Conservatives will deliver it.
The member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Number of concerns on her plate, namely that the Memorandum of Understanding signed by the old Liberal regime had no teeth, no enforcement, and no penalties for non-compliance, and this government has no strategy of how to protect Canadian auto jobs. Last week, the Environment Commissioner reported the pathetic Liberal climate change plans would have done nothing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the country, would have allowed them to grow out of control. Now here's a skill testing question for the Minister. How many tons of emissions have been reduced in the last 17 months by this voluntary agreement? Does she even know that?
The Honourable, the Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very familiar with the voluntary memorandum of understanding with the auto sector. Mr. Speaker, that was a step in the right direction. As I said, the auto sector understands that the Canadians want cleaner air and that they will be a big part of our environmental agenda. We look forward to working with them.
Honourable Member for Ajax-Pickering.
Mr. Speaker, it's bad enough the Minister of Indian Affairs gave a sole source contract to his riding president and campaign co-chair's father-in-law. But he said yesterday in the House, and I quote, it was a $50,000 contract, not $500,000. Why then does the government's own contract notice put its value between $250,000 and $500,000? Is the minister misleading this House? Moreover, why is it okay to reward his riding association's family with plum jobs? Are there even any family members left on the minister's riding association that missed his gravy train?
The Honourable, the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Speaker, Dr. Andre is qualified to serve as our Northern negotiator. Dr. Andre was hired following a publicly advertised search process. Dr. Andre is capable, effective, and able to do the job. And the best thing, Mr. Speaker, the best thing of all, if we could hold the brain, Mr. Speaker, the best thing of all is that his contract is for $50,000. That's 95% less than the Liberals were paying to their negotiator. Put another way, Mr. Speaker, 100% of the value at 5% of the cost.
The Honourable Member for Ajax-Pickering.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what the contract notice, the government's own contract notice says. The fact is, the Conservatives made a promise to end patronage, and they've blown it apart. The minister gave a massive gift to the family of his riding president and the co-chair of his last campaign. The minister is trying to obfuscate the value of this contract and gave it to someone with no experience in land claims. Mr. Speaker, it's time to bring this minister back to reality. When is the Prime Minister going to take this disgraced apprentice into the boardroom and hire someone who doesn't spell accountability P-O-R-K?
Honourable, the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Speaker, the contract between Mr. Andre as the Northern Devolution negotiator is for $50,000. He is qualified to serve as the Northern negotiator. This side of the House should terminate the slander that they're spreading in this House. Maybe it's not a surprise because we're pretty close to the philosophical, intellectual underpinnings of the Liberal Party. Big contracts for Liberals, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Desnethie, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Indian Affairs claims to care about poverty facing Aboriginal Canadians. However, his actions show he cares more about creating jobs for Conservative friends and cronies. It's not just the patronage contract he gave to Harvey Andre. He also hired a failed Conservative candidate to campaign in northern Saskatchewan. The minister is paying Jeremy Harrison to campaign in northern Saskatchewan and send out news releases on Conservative Party letterhead while listed as a government employee. Why are Canadians being billed for the re-election campaign of this defeated candidate?
The Honourable Minister of Indian Affairs. Order. Order. The Honourable the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development has the floor. We'll have a little order, please.
Mr. Speaker, yet more a malignant slander from the party opposite. Mr. Harrison is a respected former parliamentarian. He is someone who is working on assigned tasks for me, and that's the bottom line on it, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Gosnelli, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan hasn't seen abuse like this since the days of the Grand Divine Government in Saskatchewan. Mr. Harrison has stated he plans to run again in the next election, and the minister is using taxpayers' money to finance his pre-election campaign. This is disgraceful. A defeated MP being paid by Indian Affairs to spend his days driving around northern Saskatchewan, polling chiefs and Métis leaders on what they think his electoral chances are. And this after Mr. Harrison called Aboriginal communities banana republics. When will the minister stop abusing the public purse for his friend and cronies, show more accountability, and fire this defeated candidate?
Order. The Honourable, the President of the Treasury Board now has the floor. We'll have a little order.
Mr. Speaker, I say to my colleague opposite, it does take gall. A day after the Public Service Commission, an independent, arm's-length body reporting to Parliament, Mr. Speaker, a day after the Public Service Commission has identified that the political assistants were hired by Liberal ministers who invented phantom jobs, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the member opposite we will be asking some very significant questions to the member for Vancouver South, the member for Kings Heads, who engaged in what is nothing more than fraudulent political activity at the cost of our public service.
Order. The honourable member for Marc-Aurèle Fortin. Order, please. Mr. Speaker, for purely ideological reasons, the government decided to put an end to the part of the firearms registry involving handguns, and 5 million of these have already been registered. If his bill is adopted, can the Minister of Public Safety tell us what he intends to do with these firearms? Remove them from the registry to make them inaccessible, or maintain the registry? The Honourable Member of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I apologize. I get very emotional when I speak to you. Mr. Speaker, we want a more efficient system. We want a registry which will work properly, and the Auditor General said that the former system doesn't work. We want a system that will work. We want to protect our communities and our citizens. The Honourable Member from Marc-Aurèle Fortin. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that you have seen that this is an answer to my question. I'm asking the Minister to give this some thought and to realize that it would be a waste to do away with what has already been registered. But is the Minister aware that there will be two categories of citizens if he maintains the registry? Those who respected the law and those who defied the law. And I would venture to say that those who defied the law are more dangerous than those who respected it. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we will maintain all of the names of those who are in possession of firearms, the ones that aren't prohibited as well as the ones that are prohibited. We will maintain the list of all of the names of those who are in possession of firearms.
Mr.
Speaker,
Last night, Conservative government members acknowledged that there is a genocide occurring in Darfur, but would only promise action if given permission by the same murderous regime in Khartoum that is engaging in this genocide. Even the Prime Minister said La Francophonie. He said, we must act to save a desperate population. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister this. Will he act? Will he act to support UN Security Resolution 1706, take a leadership role, and get those forces into the ground now to stop Darfur's agony?
The Honourable the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was a very fulsome debate last night here in the Chamber, and we discussed in great detail the need for Canada and other countries to do more with the United Nations to see that the transition between the African Union and the United Nations missions take place, that we need to continue to work diplomatically to see that that happens, not embark on some kind of a unilateral invasion, which is what the member opposite advocated.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Bellechasse. Order. Mr. Speaker, many workers are affected by problems in the manufacturing sector. I'd like to ask my colleague, the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development, what our government intends to do with respect to the impending end of the transitional measures for EI in New Brunswick and Quebec. The Honourable Minister of Social Development. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to announce today that the transitional measures that apply to economic regions for Madawaska, Charlotte, and New Brunswick, and the Lower St. Lawrence North Shore in Quebec have been extended. This will protect the workers in these regions while the government completes its 5-year examination. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Sackville Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the United Nations, Mr. Speaker, there's a debate going on among countries around the world to stop high seas dragging on the oceans, Mr. Speaker. Australia has led the way. United Kingdom and other countries now are following suit. My question quite simply to the Fisheries Minister of Canada, will he now show leadership for all of us in this Parliament and tell the world that we will support a moratorium on high seas dragging on the oceans?
The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Mr. Speaker, I was exceptionally pleased yesterday to see the direction given by President Bush to his Secretary of State and Secretary of Commerce. The instructions and directions he gave them were very similar to the ones I gave our group who went to the NAFO meetings. The difference was we went and we delivered on the directions given. We are not just talking about them, but we are glad to see that President Bush and the United States is now supporting our direction. In relation to dragging, Mr. Speaker, let me just say that if we ban dragging, we wipe out a number of fishing communities in
The Honourable Member for Sackville Eastern Shore.
Mr. Speaker, what absolute nonsense. The last time I checked, my paycheck is paid by the taxpayers who are fishermen in this country, and they want their oceans protected. They want dragging stopped on the high seas to protect the fish stocks in Canada. So I'm going to ask the Prime Minister of Canada a very simple question. Will he now show leadership and support the UN call, support the Australian call to ban dragging on the high seas once and for all?
The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Mr. Speaker, we're working with our UN counterparts to make sure that we protect the habitat, that we protect the fish stocks. But let me say to the Honourable Member, we have to make sure our decisions are based on science. Banning technology is one thing. Improving technology is something else. Let's not cut off our nose to spite our face, but let's make sure that we do protect the habitat and the stocks, and we will take the leadership, Mr. Speaker, in doing whatever has to be done to achieve that aim.
Honourable Member for Esquimalt, Wandafuka.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, I'm not quite sure when supporting a UN Security Council resolution entails an invasion. Perhaps one day he can explain that. But his own government, Mr. Speaker, said that enforcement action or military intervention is required when peaceful means have failed. Well, Mr. Speaker, genocide is occurring.
Diplomacy has failed, and the time for half measures is over. So again, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask, why is this government being so hypocritical, saying that an intervention is required in Darfur now, but they will not support that same intervention?
The Honourable the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first let me say that Canada is doing an incredible job supporting the people of Darfur. We're contributing over $320 million. But let me say to the Minister from the Esquimalt 1 to Fuca, I'll do him one better. I'll tell him exactly what he said last night. Yes, we should get troops into Darfur. If the member wants to call it an invasion, then it's an invasion. Those are his words.
Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Stakeholder groups such as the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, as well as the Sport Fishing Industry Association, have raised serious concerns over proposed changes to Ontario fishing regulations. They're seeking regulations based on the best science available and to ensure that their views are duly considered prior to federal approval of these important regulations. Given the concerns voiced by these groups, will the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans ensure that they will be taken into account?
The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Mr. Speaker, let me assure my colleague that proper regulations, proper fisheries regulations are the key to conservation and management. We have a philosophy which involves the provinces and the stakeholders as we make regulations pertaining to certain areas. In this case, these regulations are provincial ones, being developed in consultation with the affected groups, and which will come to us for approval. We're looking forward to them completing their negotiations, and we will certainly approve sound-based regulations in which they all had input.
That will bring to a conclusion the question period for today. Tabling of documents. Dépôt de documents. Order. À l'ordre. Dépôt de documents.
Tabling of documents.
Government bills. Déclaration de ministre.
Statements by ministers.
Presenting reports from parliamentary delegations. L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Fond-Dollard. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 34.1, I have the honour of presenting in both official languages the report from the parliamentary delegations of the Canadian branch of the Assemblée Parlementaire de la Francophonie, meeting with officials of the Secretariat General of the APF in Paris, and that went to Jordan, Israel, Ramallah on the West Bank, and Damascus, May 19 to 26, 2006.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Présentation.
Presenting reports from committees.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough South-West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to present the first report of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. It's a succinct report, very short, and it says, further to the testimony of the Minister of Justice, the Honourable Vic Taves, and the Information Commissioner, the Honourable John Reid, before the Standing Committee, the committee recommends that the government introduce in the House, no later than December the 15th, 2006, new, strengthened and modernized access to information legislation based on the Information Commissioner's work, as promised by them during the election campaign.
Présentation de rapport.
Presenting reports from committees.
Introduction of private members' bills. Première lecture.
First reading of Senate public bills.
Motions.
Presenting petitions.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody, Westwood, Port Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in this House and present a petition
signed by a number of Canadians, I'm noticing now, from across the Lower Mainland, Abbotsford, my constituency, Richmond, West Vancouver, and elsewhere. The petition deals with an issue that I've fought hard for the past 6 years as a member of Parliament, that is to have tougher laws to fight the cowards who use date rape drugs to abuse women. I present this petition to be sent to the Justice Committee.
The Honourable Member for Thunder Bay, Rainy River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm presenting a petition of 119 names to protect children from sexual predators, and this petition comes from various people throughout my riding.